the chalk beneath her fingers. Chapter 1. The First Bell. The morning began with the soft rhythm of footsteps and the gentle tap-tap of wood against red earth. In Umuaka, a village where the sun rose unhurriedly and the air carried the scent of dew and cassava leaves, this sound was as familiar as the crowing rooster. It was Miss Ifeoma Noji making her way to school, just as she had done every day for 32 years. She carried a cloth satchel, faded blue with frayed seams, slung over one shoulder. Inside were 2 pieces of chalk, a dog-eared lesson planner, and a small flask of palm oil rice wrapped in a kerchief. In her right hand was the walking stick. Not for balance, her spine was still straight as the Iroko, but as a quiet declaration, I am still here. The school sat at the village's edge, crouched beneath a mango tree that had once been planted by a graduating class long gone. The building was more memory than structure now, cracked walls patched with cement, rusted zinc sheets that clattered in the wind, and windows missing more than just panes. Yet, it stood. And so did she. At exactly 7:30 a.m., she arrived, unlocked the school's iron gate, and stepped into the open yard. The wind swept past her skirts, lifting the edge as if to greet her. She paused a moment, breathed it in, the dry, honest air of the morning, and then rang the small brass bell she kept tied to the tree. It sang. One by one, children appeared, some barefoot, some in torn uniforms held together by hope and safety pins. Chokuma came running, his books wrapped in plastic. Ngozi followed, clutching her slate and whispering the times table. Sonny walked slowly, always last, his eyes tired but observant. They came from all directions, farm paths, clay roads, the church side, laughing, yawning, alive. Good morning, Auntie Ifeoma, they chorused. She smiled. Good morning, my stars. Are you ready to shine? Yes, Ma. Inside her classroom, there were only 6 desks for over 20 students. Some sat 2 to a bench. Others sat on the floor, scribbling in exercise books one thing. The chalkboard had a crack like lightning across its center. Still, she thought. She thought because silence was not an option, and ignorance was a thief she would not allow to roam free. Her voice filled the room, warm and crisp like roasted groundnuts. She turned verbs into dances, history into fables, arithmetic into magic tricks. When the roof leaked, she rearranged the desks. When Ngozi forgot her lunch, she shared hers. When Sonny refused to speak, she waited, not with impatience, but with belief. By noon, the classroom buzzed with energy. Children who barely ate at home answered questions with raised hands and gleaming eyes. Miss Ifeoma walked among them, correcting gently, praising often. Outside, a crow called from the Iroko tree. The world carried on, market noise, motorbikes, mothers calling for errands, but inside that classroom, time softened its edges. A woman, a chalkboard, and a generation stood stubbornly against neglect. And when the final bell rang, and the children scattered like seeds on the wind, Miss Ifeoma remained a moment longer, watching, listening, anchoring herself to the soil of purpose. Tomorrow, she would return, and so would they. Chapter 2, Dust and Dreams. Before she was Auntie Ifeoma, the woman who made children believe in impossible things, she was simply Ifeoma Noji, the girl with bright eyes and dreams bigger than her village could hold. She had grown up in a modest 2-room home with clay walls and a corrugated iron roof that rattled when it rained. Her father was a tailor, her mother, a petty trader who believed in education the way others believed in prayer. Book is your first husband, Mama used to say. Let no man snatch your future with sweet talk and perfume. Ifeoma excelled in school, the kind of child teachers remembered even years later. She walked miles to attend secondary school in the neighboring town, and later earned a scholarship to study education at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Her professor spoke of her with reverence. She had a voice that commanded attention, a mind like a compass, always seeking direction, always steady. She was 24 when her younger brother, Obinna, died. It happened during the harmattan, when the air was dry and cruel. He had complained of a headache in the evening. By midnight, he was burning up. The local chemist was closed. The hospital was 30 kilometers away. They waited until morning to find a Kiki willing to take them. It was too late. The doctor shook his head with that practiced detachment. Simple malaria. If he'd been treated 6 hours earlier. Grief knocked the wind out of her dreams. She didn't return to Nsukka. She turned down the job at a private secondary school in Enugu. While her classmates scattered across the country and beyond, Ifeoma came home and stayed. She began teaching at Umuaka Community Primary School not because it was prestigious or well-funded, but because it needed her. The headmaster then, old Mr. Okri, welcomed her with quiet relief. "You will bring light here," he said. And she tried. For the first 5 years, she taught with nothing but 3 textbooks and a broken blackboard. For the next 10, she supplemented lessons with bottle caps, charcoal drawings, and borrowed storybooks. When the local government sent only 2 dozen exercise books for the whole school, she tore them into half so each child could have something to write in. The community respected her, but only just. Education was not bread. It did not fill stomachs. There were fathers who grumbled about school fees and mothers who pulled daughters out early for marriage. She would not eat grammar, they said. One such case haunted her still. Adeobi had been brilliant, fiery, fast, curious. She had dreams of becoming a doctor and used to spend lunch breaks pretending to diagnose her classmates. But one morning, she didn't come to school. Then another. By the 3rd week, Ifeoma visited her home. She found Adeobi scrubbing pots, a swelling in her belly. "She is married now," her mother said flatly. What will books do for her? Ifeoma walked home that day and wept. Not for the first time. Not for the last. Now, decades later, she still carried the weight of those she could not save. And yet, she remained. But change was blowing through Umuaka. That week, the PTA had elected a new chairman, Chief Okizi, a flamboyant trader who arrived in a Lexus and wore gold chains heavy enough to anchor a canoe. In his first meeting, he clapped his hands and declared, "We must stop wasting money on blackboards and books. Let us build a poultry business in the schoolyard. Chickens bring money. Books do not." Some parents clapped. Others hesitated. Miss Ifeoma stood slowly. "Education is not a business, Chief. Our duty is to raise minds, not market birds." Chief Okizi smiled, wide and oily. "And yet, your minds cannot even afford their own school shoes." The room chuckled uneasily. She sat down without responding. Her fingers tightened around her chalk. Outside, the harmattan winds kicked up a storm of red dust. And in that moment, Ifeoma felt it, not defeat, but something else. A call. A challenge. They could mock her, outvote her, even ignore her. But so long as one child came back to school tomorrow, she would be there. And she would teach. Chapter 3, Winds of Change. The new headmaster arrived on a Monday morning with a suitcase full of new suits and a briefcase that seemed too polished for the dusty grounds of Umuaka. Mr. Benedict Oledimeji was young, confident, and arrived with a grin that never quite reached his eyes. From the moment he stepped out of the Toyota Prado that dropped him off, Miss Ifeoma knew what kind of man he was. Finally, he declared, brushing invisible dust off his sleeves, "A place where I can make some impact. Or at least, some order." He was the government's latest appointment, part of an initiative to inject fresh leadership into rural schools. What it really meant was that the ministry wanted to shuffle postings to reward loyalty and silence complaints. Mr. Oledimeji had never taught in a village before. He made that clear. His first staff meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. He stood at the front of the teacher's room, a whiteboard marker in hand, and listed action points in large, sharp handwriting. No more lateness. No more manual records. I want everything digital, starting next week. I'll be installing biometric time clocks. As for extracurriculars, unnecessary distractions, I believe in structure. Miss Ifeoma raised a brow. Sir, we don't have electricity or computers. He chuckled. Then maybe it's time you all caught up. Within days, things began to change. The school notice board was repainted in white and navy blue, the school motto rewritten in English only, erasing the Igbo version that had stood for years. The morning assembly became rigid, timed to the second. Songs were shortened, prayers trimmed. He began observing classes unannounced, peering over teachers' shoulders like an inspector. He told Ifeoma her teaching methods were dated and sentimental. These children don't need folktales, he said after watching her integrate a traditional story into a reading lesson. They need exams, drills, rigor. These children need identity, she replied. He didn't respond. Worse still, he aligned himself with Chief Okizi's proposal for the school poultry business. We must be self-sustaining, he said. Chickens are assets. Education is an expense. Ifeoma sat quietly during that meeting, her fingers pressed together. Afterwards, in the teacher's lounge, she stood by the window and watched the students playing, laughing in the sun. Chokuma was organizing a mock spelling contest with pebbles. Ngozi and her friends were creating a dance from an old Igbo song. Do they look like distractions to you? She whispered. That week, she began holding an informal after-school session under the mango tree. It wasn't on the official schedule. She didn't ask permission. She simply waited until the last bell rang, then called out, if anyone wants to learn something new, stay. 15 children stayed. Then 20. Then more. She taught them stories that weren't in their textbooks, about the tortoise and the moon, about colonial resistance, about the stars. She helped them write letters, read maps, and practice reciting poetry with confidence. And something began to grow. The children walked taller. Their questions sharpened. Their eyes widened. Parents started to notice. One evening, a mother approached her after market. My daughter said you taught her about Queen Amina, the woman said, eyes bright. I didn't know such a woman existed. You're doing something, Auntie. Ifeoma smiled. I'm only reminding them who they already are. But the pushback followed swiftly. A formal warning letter arrived the next week, signed by Mr. Oledimeji. She was accused of unauthorized extracurricular activities, of undermining the headmaster's leadership. She read the letter in silence and then folded it neatly, placing it inside her satchel. That evening, she pulled out a dusty notebook filled with lesson plans from years ago. She added a new page, Resistance Curriculum. At the top, she wrote, when the wind changes direction, you do not surrender. You anchor deeper. Chapter 4. The inspector's visit. The letter came on a Tuesday, stamped with the insignia of the State Ministry of Education, its edges creased as though it had been passed through too many hands. It announced, in curt tones, that an inspector would be visiting Umuaka Community Primary School for an urgent and routine performance review. Routine, perhaps, but no one believed it. Whispers spread quickly. The teachers straightened their registers. Mr. Oledimeji instructed the cleaner to scrub every inch of the office and hurriedly ordered laminated charts from a contact in Owerri. Students were told to come in neat uniforms. Even those who owned none were given hand-me-downs for the day. Desks were rearranged. The broken ceiling fan in the staff room was wired to appear functional. Miss Ifeoma watched it all quietly. Madam, one teacher muttered to her, he's coming for you. They say you've been flagged. I have nothing to hide, she replied, her voice even. No, but you have something to protect. That's what frightens them. The inspector arrived with the heat of the afternoon sun, in a vehicle that kicked up red dust and expectations. Mr. Oledimeji greeted him with exaggerated enthusiasm. Sir, you honor us. Inspector Balogun was a tall, sharp-suited man with a clipboard and an expression permanently caught between boredom and suspicion. He wore mirrored sunglasses that made it impossible to know where his eyes lingered. He walked the school compound with long, dismissive strides, poking at cracked walls, scribbling notes, and asking questions that sounded more like accusations. He peered into classrooms, tapping his pen against desks, frowning at chalk handwriting. When he reached Ifeoma's class, he stood at the door without greeting. "You're the famous one," he said flatly. Ifeoma looked up from where she was guiding Sonny through a sentence. "I'm a teacher, sir. Nothing more." He scanned the room. No electric fan. No computers. No textbooks on the shelves. "And what exactly are you teaching these children without resources?" She walked to the board and held up a piece of chalk. "Language. Courage. The confidence to ask questions." He sneered. "Do they pass exams? I teach them how to think. The results follow." He clicked his pen twice. "We'll see what the report says." The final meeting was brief. Mr. Oladimeji stood beside the inspector in the staff room as the verdict was read aloud. The tone was cold, the words deliberate. "Overall, the school is underperforming. Low enrollment retention, poor infrastructure, outdated teaching methods in some areas. There is an urgent need for reform, including potential reassignment of certain staff." He didn't name her. He didn't need to. Mr. Oladimeji smiled with the politeness of a man hiding a dagger. "Thank you, sir. We will take appropriate action." When the inspector left, the silence hung thick in the room. Some teachers looked away. Others sighed. Ifeoma simply stood, gathered her books, and walked out. That night, she sat alone in her small living room, a single oil lamp casting shadows on the wall. On the table lay the ministry letter, the warning from Mr. Oladimeji, and a second envelope, this one unopened. It was from her cousin Gozi in Abuja, a job offer. A high-paying role in a new international school, air-conditioned classrooms, smart boards, a monthly salary 5 times what she earned now. She stared at it for a long time. Then she heard a knock. When she opened the door, Chokuma stood there, grown now, taller, wearing a faded university hoodie. He held a bag of rice and a small envelope. "Auntie," he said, smiling softly, "I heard. I brought something. And I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." She didn't speak. Just reached for his hand and held it tightly. Later that night, under the lamp's glow, she penned a letter of her own, not of resignation, but resistance. "You may question my methods. You may measure my worth by walls and windows. But I measure mine by the light in my students' eyes. And so long as that light remains, I will not dim mine." Chapter 5. Silence in the assembly hall. The village assembly hall was rarely full. Not unless there was a funeral or a political promise. But that evening, every bench groaned under the weight of people, elders in embroidered wrappers, women with babies tied to their backs, traders in dusty clothes fresh from their stalls. Word had spread quickly. The council was to vote on a proposal to repurpose part of the community school's land into a modern open-air market extension. Chief Okizi had drummed up support under the guise of progress. More stalls, more trade, more income. What he didn't say was that the land in question included the mango grove where children read after class, where Ifeoma taught her unofficial after-school sessions, where dreams took root under the shade of a tree. Miss Ifeoma arrived alone. She wore her old blue and white wrapper, the one with faded Adaya swirls, and carried a cloth-bound notebook like a shield. Her chin was raised, her shoulders squared. She knew what she was walking into. The meeting began with fanfare. Chief Okizi stood at the front, flanked by men who nodded on cue. He spoke of development, of economic empowerment, of turning idle land into profit. "The market needs space," he declared, "and the school is not even using that part of the compound. Let us build something useful." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. When they opened the floor for comments, Ifeoma rose slowly. Some eyes rolled. Others watched with uneasy curiosity. She stepped forward, cleared her throat, and spoke, not with fire, but with a slow, clear conviction. That land you call idle is where your children learn to believe in themselves. Where they gather under the tree because the classroom is too small. Where they dream out loud because nobody listens at home. The room shifted. A cough. A fidget. A whispered hum. You talk of progress, but what progress silences the minds of the next generation? What market is worth more than a child learning to read her first sentence? Chief Okizi waved a dismissive hand. This is not a classroom, madam. You cannot lecture us here. A few people chuckled. Another elder added, a woman should know when to be silent, especially among men. The silence fell. But Ifeoma did not shrink. She looked around the room, her eyes resting on faces she had once taught, on children of children she still taught. I have been silent when girls were pulled from school for early marriages. Silent when textbooks arrived late or not at all. Silent when teachers went unpaid for months. But not today. If you take that land, you are not just stealing soil. You are stealing futures. Someone clapped once, then stopped. No one joined. The chairman called for a vote. 23 hands went up in favor of the motion. 6 opposed. It passed. She walked home that night with her head high but her heart heavy. At home, she found her house unusually quiet. The lantern flickered. A chicken clucked somewhere outside. From her window, she could see the outline of the school in the distance, still unknowing. Later that week, she began to feel it, whispers at the market, cold greetings, parents quietly withdrawing their children. The headmaster offered no support. Even the other teachers kept their distance. You've offended the elders, one of them whispered. They think you're making noise for attention. But Ifeoma did not retreat. Each afternoon, she still held her lessons under the mango tree, even as news spread that the construction plans had begun. On the 4th day after the vote, she arrived to find the first tape markers placed around the tree. Bright red ribbon, fluttering in the breeze like a warning. She stood there for a long moment, then reached into her satchel, pulled out a stub of chalk, and wrote on the back of the tree, "We will not move." That evening, sitting on her veranda, she finally opened Gozi's letter, the job offer in Abuja, a smart school, a fresh start, a life of comfort. For a long time, she stared at the words. Then, she folded the letter, placed it beneath her Bible, and looked out toward the school. In the dark, the mango tree swayed gently, waiting. So was she. Chapter 6, The children speak by Monday morning. The red tape remained wrapped around the mango tree like a curse. No construction had begun, but the threat loomed. The ribbon fluttered each time the wind blew, as if mocking her, as if saying it's only a matter of time. Ifeoma stood beneath it before the first bell. She looked up at the branches that had sheltered generations of learning, and something inside her went still. For the first time in years, she considered not ringing the bell. But then, she heard footsteps. First one, then two, then many. The children came. Chokuma, Ngozi, Sonny, and at least 30 more, all walking slowly, quietly, their expressions unreadable. They were not in their uniforms. Instead, each wore their oldest, most worn clothes. Some had written words on pieces of cardboard, tied with string and hung around their necks. Let us learn. We are not chickens. This land grows minds. Auntie Ifeoma taught me to dream. They didn't go into class. They walked to the mango tree and sat in a circle beneath it. Silently. Ifeoma's breath caught in her throat. From the other side of the compound, Mr. Oledimeji stormed out of the office. He marched toward the gathering, his voice rising. What is this nonsense? Who organized this? None of the children answered. They simply sat straighter. I said go to class. He backed. Chokuma stood. We are in class, sir. This is where we learn. The headmaster's face darkened. You'll all be punished. Detention. Let us home. But the children did not move. Sonny raised a piece of cardboard. We are not afraid. Teachers came to the doorway, watching in silence. Some stunned, some ashamed. Ifeoma finally stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Sir, I believe the children have found their voices. Perhaps we should listen. He turned to her, livid. You put them up to this. No, she said softly. You did. With every insult, every dismissal, every ribbon on that tree. You taught them to stand. I only showed them how. By noon, the story had begun to ripple through the village. Mothers came by, curious. A few brought food. One father, a palm wine tapper, stood behind the fence for hours, watching his son hold a placard that read books not buildings. And by evening, someone had taken a picture. A cousin of Chukwuma's who worked at a radio station in Owerri posted it online. The image of barefoot children beneath a mango tree, their signs clear and stubborn, struck a nerve. By morning, the photo had gone viral. Tweets, posts, hashtags. Hashtag Umueko Uprising trended in parts of the country. Journalists called. NGO workers messaged. One blog called it to the children who sat still to save their school. On Wednesday, a battered pickup truck arrived. In it was Chukwuma's friend, Adiz, a young journalist with a camera slung over her shoulder and a fire in her eyes. I had to see this myself, she told Ifeoma. She interviewed the students, the parents, even some reluctant teachers. She captured footage of the mango tree, the broken classroom desks, and Ifeoma's makeshift lesson plans written by hand. That night, her story aired on a local network. By Friday, everything had changed. The local government released a statement reevaluating the use of public school property. The market expansion project was paused. The inspector who threatened reassignment was transferred. And most remarkably, a call came from an educational NGO offering to visit the school and assess its needs. But the most important moment came in the quiet. On that same Friday afternoon, after the students had returned to class, Ifeoma sat beneath the mango tree, alone. The ribbon was gone. In its place, someone had carved a message into the back, "Here, we learn to stand." She ran her fingers across the words. They were uneven, clumsy, but strong, just like her students. She looked up at the branches, then out across the compound. The dust still rose. The walls still cracked. But something had shifted. The children had spoken. And this time, the world had listened. Chapter 7, A village remembers the rains came too early that year, heavy and unrelenting. They washed through Umueka's narrow roads, turning red dust to slick mud and filling the gutters with stagnant water. The market overflowed. The refuse dump behind the mechanic's shop swelled. And within a week, the first child fell ill. It started with vomiting, then fever, then a quick, brutal descent into weakness. His name was Ebube. He was only 7. 2 more children followed. By the time the third was confirmed to have cholera, panic swept through the village like wildfire. The health clinic had only 1 nurse on duty and no 4 fluids. The nearest functional hospital was still over 20 kilometers away. At the school, the mood was heavy. Parents began pulling their children out again, afraid of infection. Teachers murmured about closing the building. Mr. Oledimeji locked himself in the office, claiming to be coordinating response measures via WhatsApp. Miss Ifeoma didn't wait. That evening, she took the remaining students and gathered them under the mango tree. She brought out a bucket, a bar of soap, and 2 plastic cups. "We are going to learn how to protect ourselves," she said. She showed them how to boil water, how to wash their hands properly, how to use salt and sugar to make an oral rehydration solution. She drew diagrams of intestines on the chalkboard and explained, gently but clearly, how cholera spread. "Knowledge is medicine," she told them, "and we will not be afraid of what we understand." By the next day, she had turned the mango tree into an open-air awareness center. Parents began arriving too, skeptical at first, then staying, asking questions. She sent her pupils into the village, in pairs with hand-washing flyers they helped design. She partnered with the village's only chemist to distribute ORS packets and repurpose part of the school into a recovery room. When the government response finally arrived a week later, they found the outbreak already controlled because a teacher had refused to wait. A reporter from the same Owerri station returned. This time, he didn't just interview Ifeoma. He interviewed mothers who called her our only light. He spoke to fathers who once dismissed school as a waste but now stood in line for her advice. He interviewed Sonny, who said, "She didn't just teach us ABC. She taught us how to save lives." The piece aired with the title, "The Woman Who Held Her Village Together." 3 days later, the village council held an emergency meeting, not in the assembly hall, but in front of the school. This time, there were no glares, no muttered warnings about a woman speaking out. The Igwe himself stood and addressed the crowd. "Ifeoma Noji," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "you reminded us what we forgot. That leadership does not wear a title. It wears love and sacrifice." He paused. "We have failed to see what was always in front of us. Forgive us." The council formally revoked the land grant. The mango tree would remain. And then something no one expected happened. The elders voted unanimously to rename the school Umueka Community School, Noji Memorial Grounds. Miss Ifeoma protested at first. "I'm not dead," she said with a small laugh. "You're alive," the Igwe replied. "But you've given us more than most ever do in a lifetime." That night, as the stars blinked over the hills and the mango tree stood tall and unburdened, Ifeoma sat with her old notebook and wrote quietly, "They remembered. Not my lessons, but my heart. And that is enough." Chapter 8, Seeds in the wind. The rains receded, leaving the village washed and green, as if the land had exhaled after holding its breath. The cholera outbreak had passed, but something deeper had taken root, a new rhythm in Umueka. The school compound buzzed not just with children's voices but with purpose. Miss Ifeoma now arrived at the school to find children sweeping the yard without being told, parents volunteering to repair broken benches, and teenagers tutoring younger pupils on weekends. What had once been her quiet burden had become a shared mission. She hadn't done it alone. Her former students were coming back, some in person, some in parcels, some in pixels across WhatsApp groups and Zoom meetings. Chokuma, now working as a software developer in Germany, coordinated a small alumni fund. He didn't just send money, he sent purpose. "This is not charity, auntie," he wrote in one letter. "It's repayment with interest. You made us believe. Now let us help others believe too." He and Amora, now a medical student in Lagos, began a mentorship program. Each senior student was paired with a big sibling, a graduate who had once sat under the same mango tree. Laptops arrived. Not brand new ones, but working, donated systems from colleagues abroad. Textbooks were shipped. A solar panel was installed by another old student who had trained as an electrician. The school began to bloom. And Ifeoma, she stepped back, just a little. She started mentoring younger teachers, guiding them not just in lesson plans but in how to see students, how to teach with compassion and clarity. One of them, a quiet young woman named Miss Ezen, reminded her of herself 30 years ago. Shy but observant. Sharp, with a soft voice. "You have a gift," Ifeoma told her one day. "You don't need to speak loudly to be heard." Miss Ezen smiled nervously. "I'm learning from the best." One morning, Ifeoma arrived to find something new beneath the mango tree, a wooden bench carved carefully by the carpentry students. It bore an inscription burned into the wood, "To the teacher who taught us to dream," planted by her seeds. She sat on it in silence for a while, watching her students run across the compound. Sonny was now helping run the reading club. Ngozi was teaching the younger children a folk song with hand gestures. Even Ebube, once sickly and afraid, now stood proudly at the chalkboard, solving sums for the first time without fear. A child tugged at her wrapper. Auntie Ifeoma, will you still be here when I grow up? She smiled, bent down, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind the girl's ear. If I am not, she said, you'll still hear me, in the stories, in the songs, and in the chalk that never fades. That evening, she took a walk around the compound. The same building stood, worn but stronger. The same tree stretched its limbs above them all. And yet, the school had changed, not in size, but in soul. She touched the bark of the mango tree and whispered, you held them while I shaped them. Thank you. In her journal, later that night, she wrote, they thought the wind would scatter the seeds. But it carried them, far, wide, and strong. And now, they return to plant forests. The morning of Miss Ifeoma's 60th birthday arrived gently, carried on the back of golden sunbeams and the hum of life across Umueka. The village was unusually quiet that day, not in mourning, but in reverence. She woke as she always did, before the birds, before the light, and sat by the window in her small home, watching the sky soften. Her joints ached a little more than they used to, and her eyes took longer to adjust. But her spirit stood tall. There was a knock on the door. When she opened it, there was no one. Only a bouquet of white flowers tied together with a red ribbon. No card. Just the silence of affection. She smiled, closed the door, and sat for a while with the flowers in her lap. At 10 a.m., the school bell rang, but not by her hand. Instead, Chokuma stood there in a crisp shirt and jeans, his face glowing like the boy she once knew, only taller, older, more certain. She rang it for us for 30 years, he said, loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear. Today, we ring it for her. People had come from everywhere. Former students, teachers, traders, parents, grandchildren of those she once taught, all gathered in a semicircle around the mango tree. Balloons fluttered in the breeze, colorful wrappers danced in the light, and a new sign gleamed under the sun, the Ifeoma Noji Learning Center, where hope took root. The new school building stood just behind it, simple but beautiful, solar-powered, well-ventilated, a library wing named the Story Garden, and a computer lab with 10 working laptops donated by alumni. Adis, the journalist, returned with her crew to document it all. Her documentary would later be titled, The Chalk Beneath Her Fingers. When Ifeoma was led to the center of the crowd, she was speechless. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. So many faces. So many eyes that once stared up at her from wooden benches and cracked floors. She saw Amara in her white coat, Chokuma holding hands with a toddler, Sonny now a community organizer with a book under his arm. Someone began to sing. It was Ngozi, grown now, her voice steady. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. The whole crowd joined in. It wasn't just a song. It was testimony. When silence returned, Ifeoma stepped forward. She didn't hold notes. She didn't need to. I never expected this, she said. I only came to teach, to give what I could. I stayed because your children were worth staying for. And every time the world tried to close the door on you, you opened it wider with your courage. She paused, her voice warm and full of tears. I didn't build this. You did. I only held the chalk. Applause thundered through the yard. And in that moment, the sun seemed to pause, its light golden, its warmth perfect. As if time itself bowed in gratitude. That evening, she sat under the mango tree once more, now older, surrounded by children who had become architects, nurses, mothers, dreamers. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting the school in the glow of a closing day, Miss Ifeoma closed her eyes and whispered, "Let them keep shining." And the wind answered, gentle through the leaves, carrying her legacy outward, into futures she would never see, but had already touched.